Parents of Reddit, what is the creepiest thing your young child has ever said to you?
Experience 1. I was tucking in my 2-year-old. He said,
"Goodbye, Dad."
I said,
No, we say goodnight.
he said,
I know. But this time it's goodbye.
had to check on him a few times to make sure he was still there. Experience 2. While changing my daughter in front of the open closet door. She kept looking around me and laughing. I asked her what was so funny. She said,
The man.
to which I replied,
What man?
She then pointed at the closet and said,
The man with the snake neck.
I turned around and nothing was there. I'm afraid to look into the history of my house to see if anyone hung themselves in the closet. At least she wasn't scared. Experience 3. Not to me, but to his grandmother. He was cuddling with her and being very sweet. He was about 3 at the time. He takes her face in his hands and brings his face close to hers, then tells her that she's very old and will die soon. Then he makes a point of looking at the clock. Experience 4. My 3-year-old daughter stood next to her newborn brother and looked at him for a while, then turned and looked at me and said,
Daddy, it's a monster. We should bury it.
Experience 5. I was on a bus recently and we were stopped outside a walk-in clinic. A little girl in the seat in front of me turned to her dad and said,
Death is the poor man's doctor.
And that was that. Edit, never realized this was an Irish proverb. Context, I'm Irish. Experience 6. I jokingly asked.
What's the best way to get a girlfriend?
7-year-old's response.
Tell her to be my girlfriend or she'll never see her parents again.
Experience 7. Why are you crying?
Bad man.
What bad man?
There.
Points behind me at a dark corner of the room. The lamp on the bookshelf next to said darkened corner falls off as soon as I turn to look. She slept in our bed that night. Experience 8. This sort of relates. It still makes me laugh hysterically. My childhood friend recently found his journal from when he was about 6 or 7. One entry said something along the lines of, sometimes mommy gardens. Sometimes daddy works inside the house. When daddy thinks I'm with mommy, and mommy thinks I'm with daddy, sometimes I like to go into the neighbor's garage and play with their dangerous tools. For some reason I find this to be hysterical, specifically tricking the parents and the dangerous tools part. He has no recollection of this happening. Experience 9. My 2-year-old has been running from rooms screaming lately. The reason is always,
A guy. A guy.
I'd go in the room and ask what the matter was. She would point into the empty room, terrified, whispering,
A guy.
At first, I thought I'd need to rethink everything I thought I believed about ghosts. Then, I realized a guy was actually a fly. She is terrified of flies. Experience 10. I was sound asleep, and at around 6 a.m. I was woken up by my 4-year-old daughter's face inches from mine. She looked right into my eyes and whispered,
I want to peel all your skin off.
The backstory here is I had been sunburned the previous week and was starting to peel. In my sleep-addled state, however, it was pretty terrifying for a few seconds. I didn't know if I was dreaming or what was going on. Experience 11. I don't have kids, but once, visiting some friends on a farm, my buddy's youngest girl, 5 or 6, at the time, was afraid of the chickens. I tried to explain to her that the chickens weren't there to hurt us, but she wasn't having it. So, I'm sitting around the fire pit, looking at one of the chickens a few feet in front of me when I feel the hot breath in my ear as she whispers.
See? He's always watching.
Horrific and hysterical all at once. Experience 12. My coworker's 4-year-old daughter always thought that the rattling of the water pipes in the kitchen cupboards were white wolves, and the sound always scared her. One day she was sitting at the kitchen table, and she said,
Mom, the white wolves aren't bad, they're our friends.
Her mom encouraged the idea by saying,
Yes. The white wolves are protecting us. They are our friends.
Then her daughter added in,
They're our friends, but not the man who crawls on the floor and stands by my bed.
Experience 13. I work in a preschool. Creepy crap gets said and done all the time. The one that sticks out to me happened last year. There is a small kitchenette area in our classroom that the kids use during free time for playing house or whatever pretend games they think up. There was one little girl that I was keeping a close eye on, mostly because of how withdrawn from the other kids she was. I noticed she was playing with a baby doll in the kitchenette, rocking it back and forth and singing to it. She then took the baby, shoved it into the play oven, and slammed the door shut. She turned around, looked straight at me, and said,
Sometimes bad babies go in timeout.
In the creepiest little girl voice I've ever heard before smiling and running off. That one kind of shook me. Edit, I've had a lot of people messaging me and telling me that I should keep an eye on her parents / suggesting she was abused. The concern is very heartwarming and I'm glad to see it, but I can assure you that this was not the problem. She just enjoys saying outlandish things because she enjoys the reaction. It's pretty common for kids to do that. This was just a more terrifying example. Experience 14.
My brain is telling me to do things I don't want to do.
He's 4. Edit, like many kids, she has an imaginary friend. She has just correctly identified the imaginary friend as my brain. So, when he says, my brain is telling me to do things I don't want to do, she means my imaginary friend wants to play a game that I don't want to. Experience 15. My niece was sitting on the couch with a weird look on her face. Her mom asked her what she was thinking about, and she said,
I'm imagining the waves of blood rushing over me.
Turned out they had been at a local science museum with an exhibit on the circulatory system. One of the features was a walk among some giant fake blood vessels, and she was remembering that. Experience 16. When my son was little, he, maybe 3, used to do this weird crawl where he would slide his forehead along the floor. That was pretty creepy in itself. Then one night he crawled across the hallway into my room like that and stood up a few inches from my face and made a weird meow sound. He got into bed with me and went to sleep. Another time he was freaking out about a monster in the basement, so we went down and saw nothing, of course, and as I turned out the light and headed upstairs and he said,
He's right behind us now.
I might have peed a little. Possibly the creepiest thing he did was one day I scolded him for misbehaving, so he hid his head under his blanket. I pretended I couldn't find him by saying,
Where is my little Carson?
He slowly lowered the blanket and with a dead evil stare said,
Carson is gone. I am Rick.
I'm certain he's possessed. We never knew any Ricks, as far as I can remember. Still don't. Never figured out where he picked up the name. Experience 17. My 3-year-old nephew was at my cottage. He's asked me numerous times about the girl over there while pointing at one of the back bedrooms. The place is small, and there is definitely nobody there, so I just dismiss it as a really active imagination. He has lots of imaginary friends. Then some friends are visiting, and they have a daughter around the same age. She has never met my nephew. Twice in one day, she asked about the pretty girl while pointing at the exact same room. Caught me out and I didn't know what to think. Then at Christmas, my family was over at my place and my nephew pointed at a picture of my wife and asked if she was coming to visit us here or does she just staying at the cottage. My wife died 10 years ago. Personally, I don't really believe in paranormal stuff, so it's probably just my logical brain putting together a bunch of kids' ramblings, but it definitely got my attention. Experience 18. My 5-year-old adopted little sister had a game she would play, where we would pretend to go around to people's houses and take their children. Once we rounded up enough, we would eat them violently and maliciously. This was her idea, through and through. The name of the game? Social Worker. Experience 19. My father tells me this story of my childhood every once in a while. When I was around 6 years old, my dad's best friend committed self-deletion. We'll call him Joe for the sake of the story. It was a very rough and emotional time for my dad. Joe was my dad's best man at his wedding, the one guy who was always there for him. After my dad got married, he and my mother left Joe and the town they were in to start a life outside of the town they grew up in. After years of moving around California, my family eventually moved to Utah, where my father worked for a successful internet business. Joe stayed behind in Washington. Because my family were so far away from their old life with Joe, there wasn't a lot of foresight/warning that Joe intended to end his own life. Joe's sister apparently had been blaming Joe's wife for her brother's self-deletion. Joe and his wife drank a lot of booze, and probably as a result, fought a lot. My father always said that they were a passionate couple. Yes, they would fight often, but he hardly knew two other individuals who were so completely in love. For this reason, he didn't believe it. A few days after Joe committed self-deletion, his widow called up my father sobbing about how she thought it was her fault. After about an hour of trying to console her, he told her if there was a way for me to talk to Joe now, I guarantee you that he would tell you that he loved you and that it wasn't your fault that he ended his life. Crying, she still didn't believe him, but she thanked him for the kind words and let my father go. My dad was obviously distraught after that long, hysteric conversation. He had been down in his office for a while, and he decided to come up and check on his kids while making a pot of coffee to take his mind off of things. We were all supposed to be napping, but he thought he'd peek his head into our rooms to make sure we were safe/maybe trying to add a little smile or brightness added to his day. Sure enough, when my dad got to my room, I was fast asleep on my bed. He went to my brother's room, and he was also sleeping. Finally, he checks on my sister, who is sleeping as smugly as an angel. He decides to go back towards my room and into the kitchen to make some coffee. As he walks by my room, he notices a whimper. He turns around and enters my room, where he finds me weeping. I was 5 years old, so the way I was crying seemed odd to him. Normally a 5-year-old would cry drastically over dramatically. I wasn't. I was just sitting on the side of my bed, weeping. My dad enters my room and says,
Maddie, what's up? Why are you crying?
It's then that I stop crying for a moment, look up at him with teary eyes and say,
Rick, it's not her fault. I love her. It's not her fault.
With that, I stopped crying, rolled over back onto my bed, and fell swiftly back to sleep. Needless to say, my dad pooped his pants.
We hope you enjoyed listening to today's stories. If you want to see more stories, check out these videos or check the links in the description for more videos. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And ring that notification bell.